And I'll just be starting with introduction about myself and how I came to work with African wild dogs and for AWCF. So these pictures really speak for themselves, but I originally from South Africa, grew up in South Africa, always been incredibly passionate about animals, always loved animals, never shied away from an opportunity, as you can see, to have a photo taken with a family pet. And my sister and I often joke about the photo on the top left-hand corner where we're with my Omar, because I'm clearly very happy having all the bunnies crawling on me, but my younger sister is very evidently trying to get away from all the bunnies. So always been just a big animal lover, grew up spending a lot of time camping and in the bush. Almost every family holiday was spent camping in a wildlife area, and I think that's where my passion and love for wildlife started and developed from there. So I carried that passion through and went on to study a master's in African wild dogs at university. This was a wonderful opportunity. I didn't know much about wild dogs before I started studying, and I'd only seen them a handful of times, but really just fell in love with the species when I was studying. And it was a very interesting year and a bit, camping in random locations and relying on the hospitality of landowners or managers around the Kruger National Park, who would take me in, and often sometimes the accommodation meant camping with bantam hens, and you know, all that sort of fun and games, but a really rewarding year. And it was my stepping stone to ending up in Zim and working for AWCF. I came to know of Rosemary and the work in Zimbabwe during my master's, and connected with Rosemary a couple of months after I graduated, and was only supposed to go to Zim for 3 months of volunteering, and 3 months of volunteering turned into 9 years, and now very happy to call this beautiful part of Zimbabwe my home. And I share it with my dog slash fur baby Kola, who also loves to come and watch wild dogs with me, and my husband Adriano, and parents and family, when they can get out, also come and share my life with me in Zim.
Thanks very much, Jess. So a bit like Jess, I grew up in the bush as well. I'm the little one here, and had a fairly sort of wild and feral upbringing. I know my parents are watching, so apologies, but I think it was kind of the best childhood one could get, just absolutely playing in the bush, bathing in the bush, even sleeping in the bush. And when I grew up as a young adult, I still spent as much time as I could playing in the bush. I was immensely privileged to have a lot of amazing wildlife encounters. And I kept bathing in the bush and even sleeping in the bush. I learned a lot about vehicle mechanics and became very proficient at digging myself out of sticky situations, be it mud or sand or whatever. And then I went to, so that was all in Zimbabwe, growing up there. And then I moved to Kenya, where I did my PhD, living in this little tree house. Obviously no electricity, the nearest water was 70 kilometers away. And even though I was doing my PhD, the nearest internet access was at the top of those 2 hills you see in the distance there, which my treehouse overlooked. Looking the other way, you'd see Mount Kilimanjaro, so it wasn't a hardship posting. But it was very basic, and I've always been very happy living in the bush with very basic accommodation. This is my shower, luxury shower. So in 2008, I'd finished my PhD and I moved back to Zimbabwe to take over and build up the African Wildlife Conservation Fund, which at that point was nothing more than a good idea, really. I don't know if many of you know the history of Zimbabwe, but 2008 was a very difficult period, mass hyperinflation, economic instability, and completely empty shops. I mean, these were some scenes from Zimbabwe at the time. Very, very difficult to set up a new life and a new project there. Fuel queues were days long, whether it be for vehicles or just to fill a container of fuel. And the money was interesting. I mean, our accounting, again, setting up a new project, trying to account for every cent of donor funding was challenging. When I got there, $10 million was the highest denomination. A few months later, it was 100 billion. They then just took 11 zeros off. We went back to $1. A few months later, we were up to $100 trillion. This was the reality. I mean, this looks like play money, but this is what we were dealing with when I first moved to Zimbabwe. Scenes like this were very common. You know, this kid might be going to buy a loaf of bread with all that. Certainly, you may as well have used that as loo roll because it was cheaper than actually buying loo roll. Despite that challenges, this was the start of an amazing journey. I have been in Zimbabwe now since 2008. I didn't get put off by all that, and taken AWCF to where it is today.
All right, so just to give an idea for those of you who don't know of where our project site is and where we work. So we're in the southeastern lowveld of Zimbabwe, and we work in two key protected areas, the Savi Valley Conservancy and Gonorrhea National Park. And so just in terms of a bit of the organization profile, we are registered as a trust in Zimbabwe, as a 501(c)(3) in the States, and more recently as a charity in the UK. And as Rosemary just described, being pretty much 100% field-based since 2008. And the organization mission is to maintain healthy and viable populations of African wild dogs and other large carnivores in Zimbabwe, as well as the habitats and prey species on which they depend. And we achieve this through a combination of research, conservation, and education, with a focus on improving school education standards and community livelihoods around key protected areas. So we're a very small but dedicated and passionate team. We have 11 employees, 9 of which are Zimbabwean nationals. All of our work is supported by and underpinned by and supported by the Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority, as well as the Ministry of Education. And in terms of how we keep our projects going, we apply to foundations, trusts, granting organizations, and have a handful of private donors. So our focus of our organization is large carnivore conservation, but we have African wild dogs as our flagship species. So you might be thinking, why African wild dogs? So African wild dogs are the second most endangered large carnivore in Africa after the Ethiopian wolf, and the most endangered large carnivore in Southern Africa. And as you can see from the map on the left-hand side, their distribution and range has shrunk significantly, and today they exist in less than 7% of their historical range. And latest IUCN figures estimate 660 to 700 African wild dog packs left in the wild. And we talk about packs rather than individuals because of the highly social and cooperative nature of wild dogs. So between Savi Valley Conservancy and Gonorrhea National Park, we safeguard at least 20 wild dog packs. So this is a significant stronghold, not only within the country, but in terms of the known resident range for the species at the moment. So importantly, wild dogs need a lot of space. They're very wide-ranging species. So as you can see, on average, you'll have 1 to 2 dogs per 100 square kilometers. So for example, in a city the size of Harare, you would have 1.6 million people, but less than 19 wild dogs. Similarly, in Johannesburg, that can accommodate 4 million people, you'll have less than 33 wild dogs. So in 2 areas that accommodate about 5.5 million people, you would only have 5 packs of African wild dogs. And even more importantly is that over 50% of African wild dogs range outside of protected areas. So an annual pack home range size for a pack can be as much as 3,500 square kilometers or more, but that's a very extensive range, and if they have significant favorable habitat. But more realistically, most packs will use 200 to 600 square kilometers. Now, importantly, most protected areas in Southern Africa are less than 1,000 square kilometers. So it just shows the amount of space that's needed, an amount of safe habitat to significantly protect the species. So as I said, African wild dogs require management on a significant geographical scale, and they are a fantastic flagship species for conservation, because if you can create safe habitats and protect African wild dogs, you're doing so for many other species that require significantly less space. So in terms of the challenges and threats to the species, there's habitat fragmentation and loss. There's snaring or being caught accidentally in snares that are set by bushmeat poachers for ungulates or medium-sized prey. Rabies in areas where there's high lion density, interspecific competition can also be a threat. And then roadkills or direct persecution. In our study area specifically, snaring is the biggest threat to adults in terms of causes of mortality, and for puppies it's being killed by lions, normally when they're at their denning season or 3 months when they're isolated at the den.
Thanks, Jess. So given these conservation challenges, the threats to the species and their vast ranging needs, their low density, how do we even begin to conserve them? And I think this character here on the right-hand side is probably what I looked like for most of 2008 and 2009, whilst figuring out what to do to protect such a important and beautiful but challenging species. So the first place to start, I think, as with any organisation, is to build up a good team of people. And we're proud to say at AWCF we have done that. All our staff members that we've employed have stuck with us through thick and thin from the day they were employed to today. The top 4 guys there are our amazing trackers, incredibly skilled people. And then we have many educators, community liaison officers, and a group of fantastic students that we still work with way beyond when they've done their student projects with us. We decided right at the beginning that we were going to invest long-term in Zimbabwe's wildlife and her people. It wasn't going to be a short-term project. You can't conserve animals like this with any kind of short-term initiative. We're a very passionate group of people. We care passionately about our communities and wildlife, and we want to make a tangible, sustained and positive impact. We're very dedicated. We always manage to develop and sustain anything we start. We constantly review our programs. We're adaptive. It's very important, making sure we are as effective as we possibly can be with the resources we've got and relevant to the needs. And resourceful. In Zimbabwe, we say we can make a plan. Whatever happens, we're going to make a plan and it's going to be okay. So we take what I call a four-pronged approach to conservation. The first being management-driven research. So research into the population dynamics of the species, the threats, the conservation status, all with a view to improving management and conservation. We don't do sort of research for the sake of doing research. Secondly, hands-on conservation. That includes things like removing the wire snares that Jess mentioned when dogs get them caught around their necks or other body parts and are horribly injured. So we dart the animals, put them down, take the snares off, work with anti-poaching units and our own teams to remove the wires from the bush, and conduct rabies vaccination campaigns in the domestic dogs to stop the spread of the virus into the wild dogs. Thirdly is education. We do a lot of education. We invest very heavily in the schools around us, and we'll talk about that, particularly with species that, as Jess said, are spending a lot of their time outside of protected areas, making sure that the communities around the protected areas are tolerant and understand the species is really important. And finally, the least sort of sexy, but probably almost most important, is what we call policy dialogue, or creating the management plans, creating the policy briefs and trying to get the results that we get up to decision makers. So you could actually work in any one of these aspects of conservation and do really well and have a big impact. But we firmly believe that if we work with all of them together, we work in that central red box, we can really have the biggest impact. In terms of projects, we run the Low Felt Wild Dog Project that's based in Savi Valley and focuses on dogs. Gonorrhea Predator Project, at the moment largely focused on lions because they have the biggest conservation need in the park. Dogs are doing well, lions less so, but it's all large carnivores. And then, as I said, the schools education project and some fairly new but really important community engagement projects. Talking about some of the research we do. Well, to research the dogs, you've got to find them. And that can be very, very difficult. Imagine a pack, again, you've got, let's take an average 400-500 square kilometers that they can range. They can move, you know, many tens of kilometers in a single day and night. So finding them is a challenge. Luckily, we have our team of expert scouts who utilize motorbikes most of the time. As you can see, bottom left, the dogs tend to be very relaxed around the motorbikes. Motorbikes are very nimble, very fuel efficient. Even when Jess and I are darting the dogs, we jump on the back of the motorbikes. So that's one way of finding them. If we have dogs collared, and I'll talk about that, we can use the radio telemetry. But much of the time, we just rely on the expertise of our trackers. And this picture here on the right is myself with Ruben Botte, who's our head tracker. And it's at a time when we spent 4 hours walking, following tracks in Gonorrhoea National Park, except I never saw a single track during the entire 4 hours. I was at one point, I was like, Ruben, what are we doing? Where are we going? You know, meanwhile, he somehow is magically seeing these tracks and leading us to a wild dog den, which was amazing. But they're phenomenal people. So we rely on them very heavily for tracking and research. We also use camera traps, specifically at the den sites, Wild Dogs Den, for 3 months of the year, approximately. And during that time, it's quite easy to put cameras at the den and monitor what's going on. We put them there originally to try and work out or try and count how many puppies emerged. When the pups are born, they stay in the den for a few weeks. When they emerge out of the den for the first time, it's quite important to get a good count so that we can look at pup survival and other issues related to the pack dynamics. But we soon realized we were also picking up things like snares, as you can see top right on the collared dog. He's got a bad snare injury that we picked up on a camera trap. And also lion disturbance at dens, pythons. I remember once seeing on a camera trap a python going into the den hole, looking just like a normal python, coming out of the den hole with 3 puppy-sized lumps in it. And of course, next time we did a count, there were 3 pups less, and we wouldn't have known that we wouldn't have known why they were less without the cameras. So very useful. Like I said, we do some collaring. We fit mostly satellite collars onto some of the dogs, really only the ones that are vulnerable in some way or another, ones that move out into the communities or potentially cross international boundaries. We're very close to the Mozambique boundary, and we might not be able to monitor them so easily, or if we have a very specific research question to answer. The collars do give us very interesting information. These are 2 examples of dogs that tried to disperse. On the left is Savi Valley Conservancy, and these dispersing group tried 3 different times to get out of the conservancy and couldn't. Gives us very useful information on the barriers to dispersal and what problems the dogs are encountering en route. And in the right-hand picture, it shows dogs going from Gonorrhoea in Zimbabwe into Mozambique. So we could call our colleagues in Mozambique and ask them to check up on the dogs. When we do have dogs down, we make sure we collect as much data as possible. So lots of measurements, but we also do genetic samples, blood samples for disease analysis, and basically try and make the most of having interfered in this way with the species. If a dog dies, if we don't know what cause of death is, we always do postmortems, and it's not just for dogs. We do it for any large carnivore. These lions are all lions that died in strange circumstances. The one top right we found dead, stuck down a wild dog den hole. Once she was pulled out, the alpha female and the pups were luckily still alive, but very strange circumstance. So we had to do a postmortem to find out what that was all about. And obviously sending samples off to vets for disease analysis specifically, because if there is a contagious disease like rabies or distemper, we need to know as soon as possible so we can take mitigation measures. Spore surveys or track index counts are are a very useful tool for surveying large carnivores, and we do them every year in both Savi and Gonorrhoea. They basically involve a tracker, in this case Ruben again, sitting on the front of a vehicle and counting all the large carnivore tracks, the fresh tracks, and then there are clever statistics and stuff that you use to get a population estimate from the number of tracks you've counted. One other way of surveying, particularly lion and also spotted hyena, is these call-up surveys. And Sort of a bit of a Darwin awarded sort of activity. It's not for the faint-hearted. You get to go out in the dark in remote parts of the bush and sit in the back of an open vehicle, playing the sound of a dying buffalo calf or an injured buffalo calf as loud as you can out of these loudspeakers, and then counting the large carnivores that come in. And some of them come in very close because they really want to see what this noise is about. So you shine a red filter spotlight round and count the number of lions and hyenas that you see, and then again use the statistics to give you a population estimate. You do get problems. Elephants don't like it at all, so you often get angry elephants, but you also often get herds of buffalo that come in and try to investigate exactly what you're doing to their buffalo calf, and in those cases we have to call it a day. So that's just a snapshot of some of the research we do, again, all to try and understand the population dynamics, threats to the species and their movement patterns, barriers to dispersal, etc., all to help management and conservation.
All right, great, thanks Rosemary. I'm going to be talking about our hands-on conservation efforts. So I will be touching on snaring, and there might be some images that sensitive viewers might find upsetting. So if you don't think you want to see those images, maybe walk away or go and get a cup of tea or glass of wine for a few minutes. All right, thanks. Next slide. All right, so it doesn't really need any explanation, but as you can see, snares cause terrible damage and often death. Snares are not put out to catch dogs. They're put out to catch other species, but dogs are a significant bycatch of snares. More often than not, the snares will catch dogs around the neck, as per the picture in the top left, but they can also catch them around the waist, through the face, and on their limbs. The terrible thing with snares is that they are indiscriminate, so they catch all and everything, whatever happens to walk in their path. So a significant impact on wildlife and all large carnivore species, and very wasteful. Almost 80% or over 80% of wildlife caught in snares goes unutilized. So one of the key things we do at AWCF is to remove snares from dogs if they happen to break away and are carrying them. Because our scouts monitor the pack so comprehensively, more often than not, we can detect if a dog is carrying a wire and remove it quickly. And more often than not, if you get the wire off, the dogs make a full recovery. So, but this can obviously have its challenges. So the picture up on the top left, it's not very clear, but this is a dog that once darted, made its way back up, walked up a little kopi or gobo, and my scouts had quite a difficult time. He was a big fat male, so they had a difficult time carrying him down over all those rocks. And likewise, if it's an unhabituated pack or a pack that does tend to hide in thick bush or up in hills, you often have to, as Rosemary's described, already use a call-up system with a buffalo calf in distress and a bait. So as per the bottom left picture, and then if the pack comes down, it works very effectively. The pack comes down, eats on the bait, and you have an opportunity to dart the injured individual or individuals. Most of the time, however, again, unique to our study area, I think, but because our scouts operate on bikes, most of the packs are very habituated to the scouts on the bikes. So we found it a very effective method to approach dogs on bikes to dart as well. So priority once the animal is down, and both myself and Rosemary are licensed with dangerous drugs licenses to immobilize wildlife ethically and safely for snare removals or collaring for research. So unless it's a very significant injury that needs veterinary attention, then we are able to treat the animals ourselves. So the key thing is to get the animal down, to get the wire off, and then we clean the wound with topical treatments and give the animals a good dose of vitamins and penicillin. And most of the time, if you can get the wire off, the animals make a full recovery, being looked after by their pack and pack mates. One of the other key things is to remove the wires from the bush before they have a chance to catch any of the animals. So this is it's a huge, especially in both Savi and Savi Valley Conservancy and Goneril National Park. Snaring is a big problem, and it requires a big group effort from ranch scouts and our team, and importantly working with our resident security and anti-poaching authorities. In Sabi Valley Conservancy, that's the anti-poaching tracking specialists who really lead the charge. And with canine units, both in Sabi Valley Conservancy and Gonarezhou, they do an incredible job at removing significant amounts of wire from the bush. And then finally, just in terms of the last hands-on activity, it's vaccinating domestic dogs in the communities that surround both Sabi Valley Conservancy and Gonarezhou National Park. Wild dogs particularly, but also other wildlife species are highly susceptible to rabies, and it can be significantly detrimental if it did get into the wild dog populations. And the best way to control that is to keep domestic dogs in the neighbouring communities vaccinated, especially with wildlife roaming out of the wildlife areas, poachers coming into the area with domestic dogs, and we've often seen domestic dogs with poachers at our wild dog dens. So there are a lot of opportunities for high risk contact. So keeping the virus low in the wild dog in the domestic dog populations is the best way to eliminate an outbreak.
Thanks, Jess. So moving on to our third sort of approach for conservation, it's education, schools-based education. And if I can just read you this quote, it sums up why we do what we do, really. It says, "In the end, we conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand. We will understand only what we are taught." And for me, that really says it all. You know, we are very privileged people. We had a great education, and we've learned to love things. We've learned to understand and love it. But you couldn't bother about conservation if you didn't understand and you didn't have that opportunity to learn. Nelson Mandela, education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. Well, we don't have quite such lofty aspirations, but we are trying to change our little corner of the world and make a difference both for the lives of the people in the area and longer term and bigger picture for the wildlife species and the entire landscape, a landscape of coexistence. So our schools education programme works with 108 primary schools. That's almost all the primary schools within a 10-kilometre radius of Sabi Valley and Gonarezhou, and 10 key focal secondary schools. And during the peak of the COVID crisis, we conducted a strategic overview of the entire programme. We couldn't go into schools, schools were shut and community programmes couldn't happen. So we took the opportunity to employ a professional educator and strategically revise our entire education project. And everything we do is all therefore sort of very cleverly fitted together and part of a bigger picture, if you like, with clear direction to make the biggest impact. We do numerous different things, which I'll talk about. These include teacher training, provision of education resources, showing DVDs and giving presentations, cluster competitions between schools, a predator scholarship program, a library program, solar reading lights, literacy programs, and the very popular day trips and field trips into protected areas. We work directly probably with about 60,000 students, but we reach a lot more than that through the teachers. The teachers are the biggest asset and obviously the front line in the sort of rush to educate. And it's very much a two-way dialogue. We train them in the resources that we've developed, and we train them in a number of ways, but likewise we listen to them, and all the resources are developed with teacher input, and yeah, everything we do is very much thanks to teachers. And some of the resources we put into schools, lots of posters, very popular, as you can see here. And one of the biggest problems wild dogs face actually is misperceptions. People think they're feral domestic dogs, or people think they're hyenas or jackals. And so we often get people saying, oh, the wild dogs have eaten my goats, and actually it was hyenas. So just a simple visual identification guide that we've developed. And it's not just dogs as well. We do lots of other posters and banners as well. And another spot the difference with the spotted cats. Another resource is this called the Lowveld ABC, originally the brainchild of Shishakwi Ranch, where we're based. But that's a fantastic resource. It's one of the most popular resources we have, used for literacy in the lower grades and at the upper grades in all sorts of ways. All those pictures have a few key facts about the animal or the species on the back, and the kids can use it for creative writing. They use it in their drama and art classes as well as science. It can be used in numerous different ways. In this case, they look like they've pulled out all the carnivores, but they can also use it to make food chains or pair up species, and very, very popular resource. Now, showing DVDs or use of the visual media, these kids have never seen TV. Most of them don't have any kind of even electricity. Cell phones are very sparse, even amongst the adults. And so showing these kids DVDs, movies, video clips, even just live presentations with photos is an incredibly powerful way of engaging them and capturing attention and of fact retention. We've done lots of studies to see what the fact retention is after these movies, and it's very good. As you can see, they pack themselves in. There's not really any wriggle room there, but it's a great way of reaching a lot of people. These are the school competitions, cluster competitions. To date, we've conducted 13 of these, which involves 80 different schools. And the kids, you know, they build up on all the term or the year's work to put together posters and dances and poems, and they build models. Here's a wild dog model that one of the kids built, or one team of kids built. Brilliant. I mean, it's amazing. And then they also do a traditional quiz, and then they have prizes, and it's very, very engaging. The kids that come to watch absolutely love it. And more recently, we've managed to get community involvement as well. So a lot of adults come, and they're always astonished by how much the kids know. And of course, they learn a lot in return as well. Our scholarship program is really, really important. It's very rewarding. These are kids that would have not have had any opportunity even to go through secondary school. We've now got 26 scholars, 23 are in secondary school and 3 are at university. And as well as providing money for the school fees and the uniforms and exam fees and just extra support where needed, each year we run a scholarship field course, a leadership and field course, where they both learn about bush survival skills and conservation and wildlife research. Here they are learning to track. We'd hidden a wild dog collar and then had someone jump out and give them a fright when they found it. It's also about team building, and we have lectures and discussions on things like CV writing and interview skills and things like that to try and help them sort of develop some life skills. Very, very popular. A lot of the kids say it's the highlight of their, certainly the academic year, if not their lives so far. A library project, very much thanks to the Zambezi School Book Project and Books for Africa, we've now put in 2,800 boxes of books into 107 different libraries. 107 of our 108 schools now have libraries, and these are schools that didn't really have books before. They might have had a handful of scruffy books that had been thumbed through for decades. So this is a real game changer, and libraries utilised in all sorts of different ways. But as you'll see at the end, they've had a real impact on things like the school pass rates and just trying to get the children a better education, really. Along with the libraries, and thanks also to the Bork Family Foundation, we've put in 7,500 solar reading lights. So these go into the libraries and can be loaned out with the books. So when the kids take the book, they take a light, they'll go home, they'll do all their chores. They need to help their parents with fetching water or cutting firewood or looking after their younger siblings or whatever. And then when it gets dark, they then have the opportunity to study, to read, to just enjoy a good book. And this has been very, very popular. Literacy program I won't talk much about. It's very expensive. It's a very good project, but we just don't have a lot of funding to do it. But it's called Happy Readers, government approved, and very, very effective at helping these kids learn to read. This is our education vehicle around Gonorrhoea. I just put it in because it's really cool. And I'm not the only one that thinks so. Every time it goes anywhere near a community, it gets swarmed with excited children. And that's what our team uses there. And we also have this game drive truck, which was a big investment for us, but it's been incredibly useful. And we've managed to do hundreds of day trips now into both Gonorrhoea and Savi, where we pack the kids into the truck and take them off to see the wildlife, which often they haven't seen before. potentially only in conflict situations. Here they are just enjoying in the bush and at the Chilojo Cliffs in Ngorongoro National Park.
Excuse me. And then, so as Rosemary said, we invest very heavily in the future generation and do a lot of work with children, but we also invest in the current generation, which is our adult community members, and focus very strongly on the community leaders and influential members in the community. So whether it's the school heads, teachers, conservation, club leaders, village heads or councillors and chiefs. And so just to give an example of some of the community projects that we do, we would love to be doing more of this, but again, funding is a limitation. So one is nutritional gardens. So this is some schools will come to us and ask for help either with providing seedlings or the fencing for their nutritional gardens, and it provides a great opportunity to grow sustainable vegetables, not only for the school, but for the neighbouring community. Some plant trees in terms of greening up their school space. The example with the ladies is vocational training. So this was 8 ladies that we helped get trained in garment making and sewing skills. These ladies between them have 54 dependents. So the impact extends far beyond just these 8 ladies. And we hope that now with their the skills that they've developed and their income, the income that they can generate, they can support their families better. In the bottom left-hand corner, that's the cultural fairs that we support. So these are opportunities for all age groups and all members of the community to come and engage with our education officers and liaison officers and to hear about our work and our programs and conservation messaging. And then importantly, when COVID hit, so between 2020 to early 2021, we provided 10 key clinics around both Savi Valley Conservancy and Ngorongoro National Park with personal protective equipment. And this was a huge help and was received very gratefully from the clinics who were very weren't equipped to handle COVID, and help them obviously protect themselves and help the communities during that difficult time. And then this project, this Mavava water project, was really a highlight for us. It was only made possible because of a very generous donation from a private donor. And it allowed us to establish a 5,000 litre water tank and essentially a fresh water system to Mavava School and Clinic. And it's not only supporting the school, which has 750 students, and the clinic, but also 120 households around both the school and clinic. And you can see this project was so gratefully received by the communities, the ladies, the teachers, everyone, sorry, the ladies and children, everyone got involved with digging the trenches for the pipeline. And the bottom right-hand picture was the first moments that they experienced getting fresh water out of a tap, which is a game changer for these communities. Most of the villages we support, they have to walk at least 5 to 10 kilometers for fresh water. So this project came at a critical time when COVID had just hit. So the increased fresh water obviously aided with sanitation. It's opened doors in terms of other income generating projects like horticulture and nutritional gardens for the schools. And having a fresh water supply will also aid with teacher retention of the schools, because a lot of the time there's a high staff turnover at schools because the living conditions are just so difficult for the staff members. And then I know I've already touched on rabies campaigns, but just to bring it back in terms of community engagement as well, because obviously rabies is a virus that not only impacts wildlife, but can cause human death as well. So it's an opportunity for us to not only vaccinate domestic dogs and protect wildlife, but also to help with domestic animal health and human welfare. And then solar powered community library. So this again is with through support and only because of generous donations from the Borg Family Foundation. So as Rosemary's mentioned, we have the individual solar lamps. These are panels which help with lighting up whole classroom blocks. And we call them community libraries because they've been issued to schools that have the capacity to open up their libraries or classroom blocks to the wider community and households close to the school. So it's not only facilitating learning for the children, but also for the adults and adult community members close to the school. And to date, we've developed 16 solar-powered community libraries. And then just in terms of one of the last example of a project, it's still in its early stages, but it's a Fence Guardians initiative. And this is where we are forming genuine partnerships with 4 villages on the western boundary of Sabi Valley Conservancy. This is a project very much in partnership with SVC and ranch management, as well as the anti-poaching tracking specialist as a security authority. And at this stage, it's in the early pilot stages of just having the community meetings. But in time, we will employ the community members on a contractual basis and to help maintain the western boundary fence line. And this will have mutual benefits. It will help obviously keep wildlife inside and prevent human-wildlife conflict outside. And also having people who are responsible for a section of the fence, they can report any breaches if they see poachers moving across the fence or signs of spoor going in or out, as well as making sure that none of the wire is stolen, because often fencing wire is stolen and gets recirculated as snare wires.
Thanks, Jess. And just one slide for our last component, the policy dialogue bit. And I show this slide and people tend to think this blonde character on the bottom left is me. Actually, I'm the one standing up banging the table, because sometimes it can be very difficult. It can be really frustrating trying to deal with governments or district councils or provincial authorities or whoever it is. But it's really, really important. You know, your impact is so much greater if you can get heard by these decision makers and up at these levels. So we do try and do that side of things as well. We do monitor all aspects of our work. So you've heard kind of a snapshot of what we do and all the different kinds of things that go into conservation. I'm not sure I realised what I'd be taking on when we first started AWCF, but this photo just shows some kids doing an evaluation test, but we monitor across the board everything we do. And it's working, you know, it really is working. These are some education examples. If we look at the graph on the left, the percentage school pass rates for their end of primary school exams were 37% before the libraries. After we put libraries in, that pass rates increased just in a few years to 55%. Likewise, the literacy program has increased the literacy rate in some schools from 52% to 83%. We've got statistics like this across the board, and really the programs are working. In terms of dogs, they're thriving. They're doing extremely well in Sabi Valley and Gonera Zoo. They're really stable, probably at capacity. I don't think, we'd like to say they're still increasing, but I think they've increased now to pretty much a natural capacity. They're at one of the highest densities in the world at the moment that's outside of small fenced areas. So that's very successful, and other species doing well too. One sort of anecdotal or anecdotal story to show that our education works, and was a very proud moment for AWCF, is this story here, where we had 3 school children who came across African wild dog puppies drowning in one of the irrigation canals when they were walking home from school. So they ran back to school, got their teachers, the teachers came and pulled them out and saved the dogs. Now, we didn't hear about this for a while. When we did, we went down and we congratulated the kids and we gave them little certificates, but we asked them, why did you do this sort of thing? And, very much paraphrasing, but their answer was basically, well, we knew what they were because here's your poster on the wall, and we knew that they weren't dangerous, so we could rescue them, despite the rest of the pack, of course, is still there, because wild dogs would never leave their puppies. So the whole pack is still there. The kids were like, we knew they weren't dangerous because you've told us. And we knew they were endangered and important, so we got the teachers to pull them out. And it was I've even got goosebumps now, it was such a powerful moment, just realizing that however hard these programs are to evaluate in terms of impact on behavior, it does make a difference, it does work, and it does change both minds and behavior.
Okay, and then over the years, we've seen more and more evidence of communities coming on side with conservation. So in the first picture here, we've got Joshua Chandamaro, who's one of our scholarship students. And after going through our program, he elected to carry on with or pursue his passion in conservation and studied a BSc in wildlife and ecology at Chinhoyi University. This is Munashi Puzi, who's another one of our scholarship students, who we were just so happy to see. He just came to one of our rabies campaigns when we were doing a village in this area, and fantastic to see that reciprocal support. And he came with his friends and they brought their dogs, and just to see that level of engagement. And then this was Mbuya Nahanda Primary School, who came to us and said, look, we would really love to start a vegetable garden. can you help us? You know, we can't afford all the fencing. So it was their initiative. They wanted to sort of go more green, and we helped to provide the fencing for that. And then finally, which is another nice example, is the Rhino Challenge, which happened in October 2020 in Savi Valley Conservancy. We had some of our school teachers and heads who wanted to join and be part of our team, and very proudly wore their Wild Dog shirts and ran as part of the AWCF team. So yeah, that's it. And just in closing, we would like to acknowledge our partners and the level of support. We could not do and what we do, and we could not achieve what we have without their support. So to all the managers and owners of Savi Valley Conservancy, Gonorrhea Conservation Trust, for our work in and around Gonorrhea National Park. Shishakwe needs special mention. It's our home, it's our project base within the Conservancy, and Shishakwe does an incredible amount to support us. As I've mentioned before, all of our work is done with support from Zimbabwe Parks and Wildlife Management Authority, as well as the Ministry of Education. And for the Security Authority within Savi Valley Conservancy, anti-poaching tracking specialists who we work very closely with, and yeah, honestly just couldn't do what we do without all of our partners. And of course, a huge thank you to all of the foundations, trusts and organizations which have supported our work, and to the handful of private donors. Just a huge, huge thank you. And thank you to everyone who's joined us this evening, morning, afternoon. Thank you for listening. We hope you've enjoyed what we've had to say, and we are very happy to take any questions.
Thank you both, Rosemary and Jess. So we do have like a few questions. So first of all, can you tell us, can you explain if wild dogs make good pets?
No, is the answer. Luckily for them, they don't make good pets at all. People have tried to domesticate them. They don't bond well with people. You know, particularly if you have more than one, they bond with each other. They won't bond with you. They won't bond with domestic dogs. They retain, wild dogs got a very strong odor, and they retain that odor pretty much no matter how much pet shampoo you use on them. So then they're quite smelly. They're very naughty. I've heard stories of them, you know, being in a house and digging through the walls to rip out electricity wires and stuff. So fortunately for them, they do not make good pets, no.
And can you share with us your favorite wild dog story?
Too many. Too many. Well, one story that I'm incredibly passionate about, and I think it's probably stuck with me because it was one of the first really epic wild dog survival stories that I'd encountered since starting in with AWCF and in Savi Valley. It was a story about a dog who, she was only a year old at the time, and her pack was out hunting, and she had a bad run-in with lions. I mean, as we know, lions like to try and steal kills from wild dogs, and she was very badly injured. And I still remember Rosemary and I went to see, the scouts reported an injured dog. We went to see, and she had a whole piece of skin missing from her side. Her back legs were all scratched up. Her back left leg looked broken. She had puncture wounds everywhere. And we just thought, well, we don't know what to do here. We consulted vets. They said, look, the best thing to do is to leave her with her pack. They will, you know, taking her away from the pack right now will be way too traumatic. And anyway, we went back the next morning, not expecting to find her alive. Her name was Scarlett, and she was alive, and obviously being very doted on by the pack, and looking after her, licking her wounds, making sure that she got fed, and went on to recover and never regained full function of her back left leg, but just went on to lead pretty much a normal wild dog life. And to me, I think that just spoke to the resilience of the species, just their absolutely caring and social nature, how the rest of the pack looked after her, and just the will of the species to survive.
Must I go now with one? Very quickly, I suppose. I mean, there are so many, like Jess says, but one particularly comes to mind, one moment. It was to do with a dog called Flame. Sorry, you can hear my dogs out in the background, but so a dog called Flame, who unfortunately had such a bad injury on one of his back legs that we needed to amputate the leg. He was going to otherwise die. So we had vets out, and we darted the dog, and we were close to the den. We'd set up the table. The drip was hanging from a tree. You know, we were balancing our anthills, trying to do the surgery. And meanwhile, in the background, the rest of the pack was so relaxed with us, they just called out all the puppies. The puppies are now running around almost under our feet while trying to amputate the dog's leg. The sunset was spectacular that night. And it was really hard to sort of even work out where to look. The vets luckily were very focused on the dog, but just to be saving a life of an endangered species at the same time as witnessing the spectacle of the pups on the most beautiful evening imaginable was pretty memorable.
Thank you both. So we've got a question for Amy. What kind of changes are you hoping to achieve with the policy dialogue?
Thanks, Amy.
That's you.
Yeah, so Amy's on our board of trustees for AWCF. And what we're trying to achieve with the policy dialogue is things like more sensible localized land use policies, for example, so to protect some of the corridors. For example, the corridor that is between Gonorrhoea National Park and Kruger National Park, very important area of connectivity. These dogs, because of the vast areas they move in, they need connectivity and they need it protected. So we want to engage with the rural district councils and the decision makers for that area to develop some land use policies, some village land use plans, some community conservation initiatives that will help protect that land. We work with government a lot to do national conservation strategies and action plans, and then try and encourage implementation of those, both at the field level and at the policy level. Things like that. We did translocation guidelines into Gonorrhoea so that the authorities or whoever would stop just sort of putting species that shouldn't be there, or dumping large carnivores in where they just walk out again, or putting problem lions straight into the middle of a park where they just cause problems again. So we developed the translocation guidelines for that sort of thing. That's sort of thing.
Thanks. There are like a few questions, actually. It's the same question from different people who are asking if you are open to take any volunteers, even for a short period of time.
We would love to. The answer really is no. We haven't got enough. We're not big enough. We don't have accommodation. We don't have a spare vehicle. A lot of what we do, believe it or not, despite everything we've said, Jess and I spend a lot of our time trying to fundraise and sit in front of our computer. We would love fundraising volunteers. We would love anybody to come on board and help with that sort of thing. And I can tell you that as soon as you start making yourself useful with fundraising, you'd be welcome to come out. We'd make a plan, but we don't have the capacity for any kind of volunteer program. Where we do have space or time, we prioritize Zimbabwean students, because we're quite we really believe in the value of capacitating national conservationists and Zimbabwean ecologists. So I'm sorry, it's disappointing. I wish we could run a volunteer program, but if you do want to get involved with fundraising or media or some kind of initiative, do get in touch.
And then there is a question from Roanna, who just raised a hand. I've enabled your microphone if you want to ask the question yourself. Otherwise, I see that you just posted it. Okay, what advice would you give to primary school kids looking to become rangers or involved in conservation as a career?
So can I just jump in here, because Ran is my cousin, and I'm pretty sure that question is on behalf of my nephew. And I've been telling Rana to bring Ollie out for years to come visit our work. That is my answer. Come and visit us.
We also have got a question from Claude and Barbara. Again, I've disabled your microphone if you want to ask the question yourself directly. No? Okay. Otherwise, you can post it in the chat and we can answer it later. There is
Claude and Barbara. Yeah, yes, they are Zambezi School Book Project, so they've been instrumental behind a lot of those libraries I was talking about. So, love to hear their question.
Whilst probably they type it in the chat, I can read another one from Emma. Is there any form of research we can conduct with wild dogs in captivity that can aid the work you do in the wild?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of research going on, particularly at Zoological Society of London, ZSL, things like testing new collars, for example, new technology that you don't want to sort of interfere with an endangered species in the wild to put a collar on that might be dysfunctional, for example. So testing new technologies, even testing camera traps and other things like that on domestic dogs. Disease analysis, they do quite a lot. Sort of effectiveness of rabies vaccinations in wild dogs themselves, you can do with antibody tests and things like that. So a lot of it's slightly more veterinary, however that word is. But I would say yes, and I can again point you to people that can certainly use that kind of interest.
Another question is how can we adopt a pack? What does it mean, adopting a pack?
Jess?
Yeah, so we've got 4 packs up for adoption. They're 4 of our some of our longest standing packs in the Conservancy, and we can maybe post the link in the chat. But basically, what it means is that if you adopt the pack, you then get a pack ID file. You get a certificate to say you've adopted the pack. You get a whole little story about the origin of the pack, and then sort of 3 or 4 times a year, or you get impromptu updates about the pack and about what sort of tales from the wild and what's been going on. And obviously all of the money that's raised goes towards our hands-on conservation and research and monitoring efforts for the wild dogs in our study area.
Please do adopt a pack. It's a brilliant thing. If you don't want it for yourself, it's a brilliant gift. It's really original, you know, no more plastic tack or whatever. If you want to give someone a gift of adopt a pack, it's unique. I think we're the only organisation that do adopt Wildo Pack. And you know, it's Jess and I, so you'll know the people behind it. You know, it's very personal. We put a lot of effort into the updates from the wild, and it's a great support to us. And there's the link in the chat. Thanks, Barbara. No
worries. And there's another question that is, how do you get your funding?
Sure, through blood, sweat and tears would be the answer. Yeah, we basically spend an awful lot of time writing grant applications, and then the reports and the financial accounting and the updates that go with those grants that we might get. COVID has made it quite difficult. I think particularly a lot of the zoos and institutions like that, which made their money from being open to the public and then supported conservation efforts, of course, made no money for a couple of years. So a lot of our funding streams have dried up. We do have a handful of amazingly resilient private donors who support us. And we get a lot of in-kind support, like from the Zambezi School Book Project with all those library books. You know, we don't have to fundraise to buy those, but we do have, you know, an annual operating budget that we have to raise every year. It's very time consuming. It's a big struggle. We definitely haven't got the model right. We should be doing something differently. So if anyone's got any suggestions, let us know.
These are all the questions.
Great.
Did we get Claude and Barbara's in the end? No.
Yeah, they just have to unmute themselves or type the question in the chat. Even if you type it later, we can still post the answer in the chat.
Yeah. And please do feel free to get in touch. Our email addresses, which we should perhaps have put on there, would just be rosemary@africanwildlifeconservationfund.org or jess@africanwildlifeconservationfund.org. So the same as the website, but just our names up front. Yeah.
And Emma's asking, are we able to give a one-off donation just now via link instead of a monthly payment? Thank you so much again for the meeting. Yes, and I'm going to share the link with you in a second where you are just able to donate without adopting a pack. I'm going to share the link in a second.
Yeah. Thanks, Barbara. Yeah, absolutely. The website will automatically take you to a monthly donation, just because we're optimistic that people might like to do that. It's a very useful thing, but you can just click on one time and make one-time donation. Thank you very much.
And then we got another question, sorry, as well, from Rossana, who is asking if we're planning to do more of these webinars.
Yes. Yes, and I mean, we would also love to hear what people would like to hear about, yeah. What other topics, yeah, what people would be interested to hear about. So if you've got any suggestions, please also put them in the comments box. But certainly, yes, we more.
We do plan to do, sort of 3 or 4 a year. Please do post in the chat what you'd be interested in. We've got ideas like, about the species, a lot more about the species. It's an incredible, wild dogs are incredible species. So a bit more of the sort of biology and conservation of the species, and then potentially a bit more of an in-depth understanding of some of the community and education work and how that is involved in conservation. What else were we going to do, Jess? Oh, the welfare, animal welfare side of things. So yes, but please let us know what you'd be interested in.
There is one last question, which is which one is posing the biggest threat to dogs between spotted hyena and brown hyena?
Most certainly spotted hyena. But they're not actually such a big threat. Their biggest threat is in kleptoparasitism, which is when they steal kills from wild dogs. So then the wild dogs waste all that energy making the kill, but they don't recuperate the energy because the kill is stolen. And that can have quite a big impact on health and fitness. It tends to happen much more in open ecosystems where the noise of the dogs hunting, kind of the sound travels further and hyenas can see further to come to the kill. So in our study areas, it's not such a big issue. But hyenas they go and harass the dogs at the den. They have almost quite a funny relationship. You often get hyena dog encounters, but they're a lot of bark and no bite. They run around and they yap and they squeal and they nip and they whatever, but they're not a big threat. Brown hyenas tend to be solitary. They tend to be nocturnal, and they would pose no threat really that I know of. I mean, there may be examples, but limited threat. I'm sure if a brown hyena came across a lone wild dog pup, they would kill it. All carnivores kill all other carnivores if they get an opportunity, but it would be very rare.
We finally managed to get the question from Claude and Barbara, who are asking, how do we join conservation?
How do we join?
Yeah.
I'm not sure you guys do so much for conservation already with the library donations through the conservation organisation. So I'm not sure I'm following particularly the question. Yes?
I was going to say they're pretty much fully part of conservation, so I don't know what else they could do.
We'll see if they can explain further. But yeah. These were all the questions, and yeah, spot on. 1 hour.
Great. Well, thanks very much, everyone.
Okay. Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Feel free to post any further questions you might have in the chat, and if you keep following us on our social channel, we're going to post about other series, other webinars that we're going to have in the future. And thank you so much for making it tonight.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.